My name is Martin Douglas. I'm from Newcastle, born and bred in Gosforth, and I was 6 at the beginning of the 80s and 16 at the end. In the 80s, a lot of it was to do with buying records, as pocket money was spent on the records, although at the beginning of the 80s probably things like buying comics like the Beano and 10p mix-ups and that kind of thing. And by the end of the 80s, the hobbies had probably ended up being going out for a sneaky drink in a pub that I wasn't supposed to be in, probably.
So you were buying a lot of records. What kind of music were you listening to?
I was listening to, well, a lot of the same music my older brother listened to, actually, because he, you know, as older brothers are, they've got a better music taste, and they found about all the bands that I would never have heard about otherwise. Like, so it was rock music. Bands like Rush were a big influence on me. I was a musician from about 12, so yeah, Rush. Heavy metal crept in there a bit. Although my favourite record from that era, I think, was from when I was a kid. It was MacArthur Park, about somebody leaving a cake out in the rain. And I'm still not sure who wrote the song. It was always a bit surreal. But yeah, a lot of Beatles records that my mum and dad owned. We used to listen to all that sort of stuff. Didn't appreciate any of it really. Whatever came our way. I think sometimes, a lot of the time, it would be whatever record was the on the front of a music magazine. You know, you get these sort of little flexible records that would play about 3 or 4 times on the record player, and then you had to chuck them away. But songs that were coming up the charts and things like that. Number ones. My first record, the first record I bought was Sunday Girl by Blondie, I think. I'm not sure when that came out exactly, but sometime in the 80s, yeah.
Cool. Can you name any TV shows you were watching when you were a kid?
TV shows, I suppose, when I was, I'm trying to think what, things like Swap Shop, I think 80's was. These are Saturday morning programmes, so we got up early on Saturday morning and eat as much sugary cereal as we possibly could, and then put the TV on. So yeah, things like 80's was just crazy Saturday morning type TV. Other TV shows, probably whatever was on after school, really. Things like, always Newsround was a good one. Crackerjack, Will-O the Wisp, things like, I don't know, cartoons, He-Man and stuff. Well, I think that was possibly a little bit later. But it's all a bit of a mishmash of memories. The 80s, certainly early on, it's hard to differentiate what was happening at what age. Sort of. But certainly by the end of the 80s, there was whatever I could stay up late and watch. Really, the TV still finished at like midnight, I think. Back sort of early in the 80s, anyway, there was the national anthem, and then that was it. TV finished, so you didn't really stay up that late and watch TV. That was that. So, yeah.
I suppose it would be more towards the end of the 80s, but what kind of sort of fashion styles were you following?
I was a bit of a goth when I was younger, so probably. Well, there's some photographs of me when I was at a wedding when I was 14 in France, and I had this really awful kind of pale lemon sort of suit thing on. It was a bit embarrassing, and I think I've still got the photo somewhere. But shortly after that, I decided that I'd have a bit of my own style, and there used to be a shop in Newcastle called Faze down High Bridge Street, and they sold everything for the alternative dresser, really. So there's hair dye, earrings, or that sort of thing as well. So I would probably, at about 15, I would have been, when I'd got dressed up, I'd have had a pair of pointy suede shoes on with little studs along across the top, sometimes called winkle pickers, black, quite tight trousers, but with buckles down the side of the trousers and sort of red material in the middle, sort of quite new romantic type thing, I think, and then a black shirt with big frills, big frilly sleeves, big frilly cuffs, dyed black hair, crimped black hair, a couple of earrings, sort of maybe, we used to call them dangly earrings because they were little, sort of, they were maybe an inch long, sort of dangled from your ear, not the studs or the hoops or anything like that. Little bit of black eyeliner, but tastefully applied black eyeliner, and sometimes black nail varnish as well. Um, and it took ages to get ready. And that was just to go and hang out on Old Eldon Green, really. That was to go and hang out with the other goths on the green. So yeah, and a little bit later, maybe I got a leather jacket, tassely leather jacket. Kept the crimped hair, grew hair a bit longer. Nail varnish, didn't wear that anymore. Tight jeans, black t-shirts, a bit more metally, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Were you interested in any sports in the 80s?
Yes. Well, at school, we had a table tennis team. I went to St Cuthbert's High School in Fen and Benwell, I think it is. And ever since I was a kid, I used to play table tennis. In fact, when I was 6, my dad built us a table tennis table. It wasn't quite a full-size one, so my brother and I used to play table tennis a lot. And then at school, when I got to high school, there was a table tennis team. I ended up being captain of the table tennis team. And one year, I think it was 15, we won the table tennis league, the school table tennis league. And I mean, this was amazing. It was absolutely brilliant. So it got on the stage at school. The headmaster called us up. We had some medals for us and things like that to give us some medals. And then afterwards, a couple of days later, there was a photograph of all the school teams that had won things, and me being me, didn't have my blazer. So later on, the wall at the school was like adorned with all these photographs of all the teams that had ever won anything at the school, and there was the A team, the table tennis team, and the captain of the table tennis team was the only person. That was me, the only person on the whole wall that wasn't wearing a blazer, just because why would I have remembered my blazer? At least I remembered my tie, which was a change. So yeah, but yeah, sport. I love the table tennis. That was good. Yeah.
Anything? Films, yeah.
Films. Whoa, let's see. We used to get videos at the time, VHS. We used to. My friend had a video card. I don't think we had a video player till probably 86 or 87 or something like that. It was who could afford a video player then? And when you had a video player, I just remember this the other day, you always faced it away from the window because you were worried that somebody could see the electronic display on the video and somebody would break in and steal it. Anyway, so yeah, we used to go to the video club and get all the videos that we weren't supposed to be getting out, like things like Nightmare on Elm Street and Scanners and things like this, and Ninja 1 and 2 and things like that. Sort of go away and hide at my friend's house and watch all these videos. Things like The Thing and those, but basically try and terrify the pants off ourselves and but yeah, good fun. What else? Sort of. Trying to remember when things like The Wall came out. That might be a little bit later, but we, bit of Pink Floyd, The Wall, and things like that. Obviously, probably the film I've watched the most for a long time when I was a kid was Jaws. I love Jaws. I used to watch that loads and loads and used to terrify myself and imagine all sorts of horrible things happening when to do with water. I can't remember when the film came out, but there was a film called The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I think that was early enough in the 80s. I think it was 80s. I'm pretty sure it was 80s. But yeah, I think, and that had a bit of an influence on the way, to a certain extent, the way I dressed, or the alternative, lifestyle that a film like that sort of presented. I don't know if you've seen the film, but yeah, it's good. I watched that probably every day for about 3 months. I absolutely loved it, and me and my friends were all into it, and we went. They once showed it at the Tyneside Theatre, Tyneside Cinema, and we all went. Sort of, some of us dressed up, some of us not dressed up, but we had all of the the audience participation goodies with us, like the rice and stuff you had to throw around at certain points of the performance and things. It was yeah, great fun. So I think that would probably go down as my favourite film of the 80s, actually. Yeah, like I said, I born and bred, sort of grew up in Gosforth, and as such, not a lot of social housing in that area at all, really. Very soon after the 80s, I mean, I ended up moving to a flat in Shieldfield, which is sort of quite close to the city centre, and that was, as I understood it, that was a council house. There was a girl who was living there already. I didn't move in with her as a partner, but there was a spare room in the house, and she said, "Oh, you can move in here." And the idea was that that she would, after a little while, move out, and I could take over the tenancy for the house. I still don't know if that's legal or whether you were supposed to do that. But as it happened, she ended up selling all my stuff and buying drugs with it. So anyway, this is a story that's nothing to do with it really. But anyway, but you know, this was my first experience of social housing, and then and then. I moved to another house nearby anyway. So there was, I think it was housing association at the time, and now I happen to know that some of those houses that I used to live in that area of Newcastle, they're no longer either council houses or housing association houses, and they are privately owned houses. At the time, they were in a bit of Newcastle that wasn't very desirable. You know, the whole area down, right next to the old 80's TV studio, just down that sort of area, down the hill from the Tanners. And you know, there's a few squares around there of flats. And I know people that live there now. So I don't honestly, I couldn't really tell you about what the impact there has been. Haven't been back again to visit any of the people that live in those places. You know, there's one person I know who owns his flat there now, so he has actually bought it. So I suppose what that inevitably means is that the fewer social houses available, the fewer houses that are available, then the harder it's going to be for people to start out in their own house, from moving out from their parents' house. I think there was probably a time when it was easier. I know that rent used to be a lot less, mortgage deposits used to be a lot lower as well. So, nowadays you need, I don't know, however many thousands and thousands saved up to get a deposit on a house. It's just impossible to get it, and then paying the mortgage, once you've got that, having a job or enough job security to be able to apply for a mortgage and get a mortgage. I don't know very many people younger than me that have got mortgages. Some of my friends have. A lot of my friends still can't get mortgages. They're musicians and artists and things like that. And the lucky ones got mortgages before the crash. In 2008. When it was, you could still get credit for that sort of thing. You didn't need these huge deposits and what have you. So a lot of people I know got them then, and they got cheap houses in places like Fenham and Benwell and those kinds of places. And now those houses are worth a lot more, but you can't sell them and move somewhere else because everything else is worth a lot more as well. So the sort of it continues to be difficult to do it. All the friends I went to school with, their parents owned their houses. I think there would inevitably have been a few who didn't. But it wasn't an issue. Absolutely didn't make any difference to anybody. Nobody thought, there wasn't a, they're in a council house, they're not in a council house. It was.
Can you tell us what you know and sort of remember about the miners' strike?
Mostly, I think, from what I saw on the telly, and the violence of the miners' strike. I think it was Orgreave. I think that was what it ended up being. But you saw all this stuff on the telly about what it felt like was the sort of crushing of a group of people. There was no, these miners were just put in a horrible position where they were just hounded, weren't they? It was awful. I don't remember details. It's just sort of feelings about feeling that these people were being very, very unfairly treated. And I did know there was one kid at school whose dad was a miner, who was on strike, but he didn't talk about it very much. I don't know. I think he was higher up. I don't think he was like a miner. I think he was like a manager or something. I don't know what the term would be. And then the feeling of which is probably tied in, with the whole feeling of politics at the time, which was that there was something very unfair going on, and they did only seem to be applying to the north. There was a lot of money seemed to be sloshing around down south. There was a lot of people saying that this is great, we've got loads of money, and the city was doing well and all this sort of thing, and then that juxtaposed to this sort of the horror of what these poor miners were having to put up with, which I didn't really understand. I just knew that I felt very bad for these people, and then obviously later on, found out why, you know, all the pits closed, and there was a lot of bitterness of, you know, where have these jobs gone, and then the name Thatcher cropped up a lot, you know, and it was like, it was because of this woman that, well, doesn't matter whether woman or man, because of this person that this had happened, you know, and her sort of one vision of what she thought Britain was going to be, or how she would make it fairer, or whatever her vision was going to be, so that she, you know, I think part of the excuse that filtered in to my brain was that a lot of these jobs, the miners' jobs and things like that, were dirty jobs, worthless jobs, jobs that, you know, people were, the people that did them weren't proper humans or something in some way, and that we needed to get rid of these jobs because these jobs were you know, sort of holding us back in terms of, you know, what we could be, you know, and but that didn't sit well, I don't think, with anybody, because, you know, you can't decimate sort of huge populations and then expect people to just go, all right, okay, all right, we'll get some other jobs then, because, you know, the jobs weren't provided, you know, so you know, a lot of bitterness about that sort of thing. Again, it didn't affect me. I didn't know anybody who went on strike. You know, this guy's dad or something, but, you know, it didn't seem to affect him. You know, he wasn't complaining about stuff. It was what we saw on the telly, and then, you know, back spitting image again. You know, this sort of image that you get from that of the people that were making this happen to the north. It seemed very much to the north. Yeah, and it just wasn't fair, you know. So no, but yeah, I had the impression that it was something bad that was happening to people that were close, but it wasn't affecting me, you know, luckily at the time. So
that's a really good answer for saying you wouldn't be able to say much about it. Lots of good things in there. What do you think about, or what did you think about Margaret Thatcher?
What did I think about Margaret Thatcher? From very early on, I got the idea that there was something dodgy going on. And like I said, I wasn't political. I wasn't framing it in terms of politics, and it was just in terms of what my parents were, you know, talking about, what was on the news and stuff like that. And I remember you know, Reagan at the time as well. He was, you know, president of the United States, and between them, they kind of cooked up this, or they encouraged debt. Basically, you know, they encouraged people to get into debt. They encouraged everybody to take out credit cards and basically tie themselves into you know, to debt, tie themselves into these contracts of debt with people on long-term basis. You know, very hard to get out of. You know, high interest rates, things like that. And you know, I'd always, as a kid, you know, you think, life's great, you know, isn't everything lovely? Aren't people really nice? And then there's this idea creeping in about more of I'm all right, Jack, sort of. You know, it's not that important to care about everybody else. It's yourself that you should be thinking about. You know, it's like, look after yourself. You know, it's all about me. It's not about us anymore. You know, it's all about the you know, yourself. You know, look after yourself. Don't worry about this. You know, don't worry about those people who have lost their jobs in the mines. Don't worry about the people on the street. Don't worry about this. You know, it's not. It was just this general descent into kind of, you know, selfishness, and I didn't like it when I was a kid. I was like, I don't like what's going on here, and I didn't really understand it, and I didn't really think it was going to affect my life, because that was something that was happening on the telly and on Spitting Image and on the news and things, and then, you know, later on it just does filter. You know, everybody's in debt now. Everybody's in loads and loads of debt. People are students are tied into debt for the rest of their lives. You know, there's you know, it takes away a lot of the options that you have in terms of being an artist. For example, if I had ended up going to university, which I didn't do, if I had got into a lot of debt, then my life, you know, I wouldn't have had the chance to develop as, you know, as a musician, as an artist. I wouldn't have had that chance. I'd have been working a lot more. I mean, you know, there were gaps in the work, and you know, there'd be the times when I was doing gigs, or times when I could work on the music and do that sort of thing. So yeah, yeah. It was a mixed bag, the old Thatcher thing. You know, depending on where you lived, I think made a big difference to your life. So, from what I remember Newcastle being. This was my, you know, experience of the north. Is Newcastle at that age, and Newcastle was a very run-down place. The quayside was unrecognisable now. You know, there's loads of old derelict buildings down there on both sides of the river. Um, but yeah, on the telly, it was all good. All roses down south, wasn't it? You know, there was all people had money, and there was a boom happening in the 80s, and there definitely wasn't a boom happening up here. So I guess that was what the divide was to me. You know, what I was seeing on the telly relative to what I was experiencing. You know, in the city that I lived in, there wasn't much money being spent up here. In fact, you know, the money was going. Things were getting worse and worse for a long time. And you know, possibly, you know, probably until the 90s, I would say, things didn't really start picking up, or it didn't feel like it anyway. So no, they did feel like there was a big divide going on there. Yeah.
Did you know much about the shipyard closures?
Again, I was aware of them closing. My dad had worked at a place. It's in Wallsend. It's called Parmatrada Building, and I can't for the life of me remember what it is. But I think they used to produce the big ship turbines and stuff there. In fact, I think they had some. It's a thread in my mind, but something to do with the Turbinia, which is the ship it's in the Discovery Museum in Newcastle. And actually, he was working there when he met my mum, actually, which I found out years later because we had a practice room down there in the Parmatrada building, a band that was in a few years ago, and we used to rehearse down that way. And I've mentioned it to my mum, and she said, "Oh, you know what? You know, my dad was working there when I met him." But there's nothing there now. You know, there's a couple of the big old warehouses where they used to obviously produce huge pieces of machinery and that kind of thing.